First and foremost, I do want to talk about the fact that I do have Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Utah all outside the top 25. And I did consider them, okay? I'm not crazy. I don't think that both of these teams or all of these teams are not very good football teams. But with that being said, all four of them have something in common. Really, three of them have something in common, and that's Wisconsin, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M. They are teams that have talent. They are teams that brought in new talent. They are also teams that I feel we should pump the brakes on a little bit when it comes to hyping them up. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that we have not seen it on the field. I am as high on Texas A&M as probably most people that are making media stuff, regardless on viewership, is out there, right? Outside of the Gig'ems people and all that, I am really high on this Texas A&M team. I love Connor Wigman. He was my favorite quarterback coming out for that 2022 class, which was the same class as a Cade Klubnik, for example, an initial Quinn Ewers, and even a Devin Brown, who's going to start at Ohio State, Ty Simpson, and the like. I think Connor Wigman is a fantastic quarterback, but Texas A&M needs to prove to me that they do not have those coaching barriers that Jimbo Fisher, let's face it, gave them last season. Okay, what about Oklahoma? Again, Brent Venables needs to be able to show that he can put this roster together and win those close games. This is something that they have not done, that they need to show, and I am too worried to project ahead and predict that. And then we have Wisconsin. Totally revamped offense. And again, it's not going to be the air raid that everybody says. If it was, I would be vastly more concerned about Wisconsin if it was a true air raid. It's air raid concepts in the throw game, but at the end of the day, it is going to be balanced to run balance, basically saying, well, we're going to try to keep it 50-50, but we're going to have our security blanket be the run game. And I feel like that's what Wisconsin is going to do when you have Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi at running back. The only problem I have with Wisconsin is I don't trust their offensive line. They are massive, massive human beings. They are not that athletic, which is why, again, the run game works. But the RPO game that Phil Longo wants to install, I need to see that offensive line really fit with that. I need to see that Tanner Mordecai can play big time Power 5 football. And I need to see that secondary matched up against the best weapons that they will go against, specifically like Ohio State, or even a passing game that Cam Ward and Washington State is going to have when they host the Wisconsin Badgers. So watch out for those three teams to vault up the rankings. I want to talk about Utah for a second. I do anticipate a little bit of a decline. Their defense wasn't great last year, and they lost some key pieces off that defense. They returned a lot, but they lost key pieces. I think that secondary is going to be tremendously challenged. I think they'll be pretty solid in the front seven, but overall, in the modern era of college football, and specifically the modern era of the Pac-12, you're going to have teams like Arizona throwing the ball a ton, Washington State throwing the ball a ton, UCLA probably going to throw the ball a ton. Okay, those are three teams that aren't even at the top of the conference. Who else is at the top of the conference? Oregon, Washington, USC. They can all throw the ball as well. And not to mention Oregon State, who's going to try to do the same thing that you do, except they have a legit secondary. And finally, Cam Rising's health is a little bit of a concern for me, and their weapons on the outside. So I do like some things about Utah, but overall, I think this could be a down year. I think the ceiling for the Utah Utes is probably like 8-4. Now, that's bold of me to say, and there's going to be a lot of bold stuff that I'm going to say here, but these are predictions. These are trying to project ahead, trying to be right. If I were to tell you that, all the teams that were successful last year are going to be successful again, and all the teams that weren't successful are going to fail again. If I were to do that, I would not be authentic. I would not be myself. And at the end of the day, I'm not just saying stuff to be bold. I truly do believe this stuff. I believe that Utah's best case scenario is 8-8, and I think their floor is 6-6. So I think the margin right there between their best and worst, it's very thin, because I think I have a good diagnosis of what Utah is. We'll see. if I'm right or wrong about that. I added in Missouri and Troy because I do anticipate Missouri's growth, but the biggest reason I didn't rank them is the same reason why Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Wisconsin weren't ranked. However, I'm one of few people talking about how this Missouri team could take a massive jump this year, and this is the big year if Elijah Drinkwitz wants to be the coach long-term for Missouri. This is a make-or-break year for Elijah Drinkwitz. He's got a lot of experience on defense, a loaded wide receiver room, a pretty good running back room, a good offensive line. He's got to get that quarterback position solidified, and that defense needs to be legit. And then Troy, I love what John Summerall is doing down there. They're going to have another great defense with great run game ability, and they have to play my number 25 team in conference play at home, by the way, South Alabama. I think that this was a game last year that South Alabama could have easily taken. I do expect that this team will take a massive jump this year as far as being able to be more consistent. But keep in mind, the South Alabama team, 10-2 in the regular season. They did lose to Austin Reed and Western Kentucky in the bowl game, but 10-2 last season. One of those losses only by 2 to UCLA. The other one, a close game against Troy at home, where Troy defensed them to death. And I think South Alabama's defense is going to be improved. I think their weapons are going to be improved, and they return a ton. They return more than Troy does, and I think that they should be better than Troy, and if they aren't, that's a letdown. I'm going to skip Duke for a second because South Alabama does play number 23 Tulane. They are ranked a little bit lower, Tulane is, and I'll get to Boise State, the highest ranked group of 5 team that I have. But I do think that this Tulane team is a really good team set up perfectly to, if chaos happens in college football, sneak into the college football playoff. If South Alabama, they are able to beat them, and then South Alabama holds up their end of the bargain and is a good team with 1 or 2 losses in the regular season, dare I even say win the Sun Belt, that's one good notch under their belt. If Ole Miss loses to Tulane and still goes 7-5, 8-4, that's pretty impressive, especially if Ole Miss can get a signature win against the top 25 team within the SEC, and they have opportunities. They play Alabama, they play Texas A&M, they play Georgia, they play LSU, they play all these teams, and they get LSU at home this year. Watch out for Ole Miss when it comes to Tulane possibly being able to vault their way at least into the top 10. They're on the radar. They return a good bit. I like Tulane. Not sure how much I love them. And the reason why is because they were a team that kind of, albeit in a competitive AAC last year, wasn't exactly dominant in the AAC, and they won the bowl game against USC. And though I think it's a lousy excuse to be like, oh, hey, Caleb Williams was saying like we weren't up for that game. That's a lousy excuse. You're trying to tell me you're an elite competitor, and yet you weren't up for a New Year's Six game. But at the end of the day, the way USC collapsed in that game, Tulane was not the better team. It was USC absolutely collapsing, as Lincoln Riley teams do, by the way. USC was up 45-30 with 4 minutes left. And I feel like a lot of people forget that. Tulane wasn't really – they were doing just enough offensively to stay in the game, and that's what gave them the shot when the ball just took a couple of bounces in favor of Tulane. I mean, USC muffed a kickoff at the 2-yard line, and it went out of bounds, and then they got a safety on the second play of the possession. That doesn't happen in ordinary football. So, yeah, Tulane, really good team. But I think we are a little bit too high on them. And I apologize, by the way. I see a problem with that Washington logo there. But number 24, Duke, they return Riley Leonard. They return a lot of people that you probably would not be able to name. And quite honestly, I struggled to off the top of my head. It was a little long of a time for me to really catch on to the Duke hype last year. It was watching film of Kansas and Duke. But outside of that, I hadn't really prioritized watching Duke. To the point where, of course, having a job, having, full-time, Duke was far from a priority for me to watch last year. But this is a good team now. Just because I can't name the names, I did some watching of the Duke football team from last year. I looked at the numbers. I looked at what they're returning. And yeah, it's not top of my head. I had it written down in case I were to do a schedule preview for Duke, and I missed that schedule preview. So regardless, I'm not going to flip through the pages right now. Let me tell you, I do think Duke is a really good team. I think they're not getting enough love. We'll talk about another team that's not getting enough love in a little bit. But number 22 is Ole Miss. I think they lost quite a bit on defense that is going to be very signature. But then they added some pieces on offense to help make that up. Now, where I'm going to tell you this. Somebody tried to tell me that Ole Miss is improved from last year because I have Texas Tech ranked so high, and he didn't think that Texas Tech should be ranked so high, and I'm going to tell you why. Ole Miss, I like that they picked up Zachary Franklin in the transfer portal, but at the end of the day, they also had that problem happen with the Texas A&M transfer. If you guys remember what happened there, where he joined and he left, he was supposed to be like that next guy. And at the end of the day, you lose Malik Heath, you lose Jonathan Mingo. That's losing quite a bit for Jackson Dart or Spencer Sanders, whoever emerges out of that job, which sounds like it's going to be Dart. Interesting that Sanders transferred there. This Ole Miss team is going to be interesting to watch. This is going to be a job for Lane Kiffin that is going to be decently tough, because what they had 2 years ago and then what they had last year were kind of their two better teams that Lane Kiffin, Lincoln Riley almost. Lane Kiffin had at Ole Miss, and now this year is really being able to, is this going to be a rebuild year, or is it or a transition year, however you want to put it, or are those additions you made in the portal going to be that valuable? Number 21, I love Boise State. They're going to be able to run the ball really well. I think they have some weapons on the outside, and honestly, they could use the 4- or 5-star recruit that they had from in-state. The kid's an absolute speedster, absolute dog that they were able to pick up in recruiting over Michigan. And there was somebody else involved, but I remember Michigan for sure. And I really do think that Taylon Green is going to be able to take that next step in his second year starting, to where he can become a better passer of the football, not just a game manager. And I think that's exactly what Andy Avalos' squad needs. And I think Boise State should be the preseason favorite to make the New Year's Six, not Tulane. Number 20, I have Kansas in the top 20. A lot of people are sleeping on Kansas. I think their defense is significantly improved based on experience and transfer portal gets. I think their biggest get in the transfer portal on their team was left tackle Logan Brown, who's a plug-and-play player. As a true freshman, he started at Wisconsin, left Wisconsin, still not sure why, but at the end of the day, that was probably Wisconsin's best offensive lineman. And part of the reason why I'm not high on that Wisconsin offensive line is because Logan Brown left. And then not to mention, 7 of the top 8 pass catchers from last year are back. I mean, you are talking about weapons, including Devin Neal and Mason Fairchild, the tight end, and multiple receivers. And if Jalen Daniels can stay healthy, this Kansas offense is going to be electric. And a lot of people are sleeping on them. I think this could be potentially a 9 or 10 win team if all comes to fruition. But they have limitations in talent where they could be a 6 or 7 win team. I think their floor is probably 6-6 though. Like, I think they at least make a bowl game. Number 19, another Big 12 team that a lot of people are going to be high on. It's Texas Tech, the Red Raiders. Tyler Shuck, undefeated as a starter last year. Now, he's not undefeated in his career. He had a stint back in Oregon. He had a stint, of course, in 2021 where he wasn't amazing. But at the end of the day, they have receivers. They have some dudes. They are also playing good complementary defense, unlike when they had Cliff Kingsbury. I am going to speed this up a little bit, by the way. Number 18, I have TCU. They play against Colorado. That's going to be really, really a kind of test of where TCU is compared to last year. They don't need to go and dominate Colorado. They need to be able to handle Colorado's best players, because those best players on Colorado's team are some of the best players in the country that people aren't just really giving them the respect they deserve. But TCU, I think, is still a really good team. I think they return enough. They didn't lose everybody. They just lost the big names, right? And at the end of the day, dominated the transfer portal yet again. They got a handful of Alabama players in there for TCU, some of them experimental, some of them not. I think Tommy Brockmeyer is a really good anchor on the offensive line. I think JoJo Earl is a good depth piece at wide receiver. He played a good bit at Alabama the last couple of years. But we will just have to see with TCU. I know Chandler Morris is a solid quarterback. I'm not concerned about Chandler Morris whatsoever. So the quarterback position is not a concern for me for TCU. Number 17, I love Iowa this year. All they needed to do is upgrade at quarterback. I get a lot of people are going to talk about, Brian Ferentz and this offense and how bad it is. But at the end of the day, all Iowa needed was a competent quarterback. And regardless on if he's great or not, I know he's competent when you're talking about Cade McNamara. And I know they got good tight end weapons with Eric All and Luke Lachey. And at the end of the day, this, to me, is shaping up like those 10-win Iowa teams we have come accustomed to seeing, including the one a couple years ago, except better quarterback play. Number 16, I got Kansas State. They have some pieces to replace, but they also have, a great offensive line. Fantastic. They're going to probably be able to plug and play that running back position regardless on who ends up starting, who ends up emerging. They do need to find a number one wide receiver as Malik Knowles exits, but at the end of the day, you can put a lot of trust in Will Howard. Number 15, I like Oregon State. They're going to be able to run the ball a lot. A lot of people hate on DJ Uiagalelei. I was just listening to a podcast that did. But at the end of the day, you got to remember, Brandon Streeter had absolutely made quarterbacks worse at Clemson than better as they progressed through their career. The fact that he became an offensive coordinator is mind-boggling to me because I felt like he should not have even been a quarterback's coach. Now I don't know where he is. I think I was on the right side of that. Number 14, I have the Washington Huskies. Great wide receivers. I am concerned a little bit about their run game. I am really concerned about their secondary. How is that going to match up against Bo Nix and Oregon? How's that going to match up against USC in a hypothetical matchup there, right? I think that they match up pretty decently well with a team like Oregon State, but no matter what you think of DJ Uiagalelei, he's more talented at quarterback than what they had at quarterback with guys like Tristan Gebbia, for example, or Jake Luton, or even at the end of last year, the freshman's name that is currently slipping my mind. I don't know why it's Ben Gulbranson. That's what it is. Anyway, number 13, Notre Dame. I might end up being higher on Notre Dame, but I didn't want to change my predictions on Notre Dame. Notre Dame's going to be a dangerous team now. Now, their wide receiver answers still need to be answered, but they have an awesome offensive line. They have a huge, deep core of running backs that even though I'm one that's not necessarily super high on Audric Estime, as in a lot of people think he's a stud or an absolute star, he's a good player. He's a one-trick pony, but that's where some of the versatility is nice. And the only thing that I would like from them is, keeping Logan Diggs would have been really nice, but they didn't. Number 12, Tennessee. Joe Milton still needs to prove that he can be a big-time quarterback in big-time games. But overall, I think that Tennessee is a very solid team. Yet again, I think their defense is going to be slightly improved. I think they're taking steps to do that. I also really like their wide receiver core still. It's not as good as last year, but they have a good wide receiver core. Number 11, Texas. I got a lot of flack for ranking Texas as the best wide receiver core in America. Now, Ohio State can easily overtake that. I had them too. And that all depends, and we'll talk about Ohio State in a second. That all depends on some things with Ohio State. But what they have that is proven to me, I know Jonte Cook is listed as the best freshman. And until we see game film, I'm going to consider him the best freshman. And that is relevant to Ohio State because we'll talk about a specific freshman when we get to Ohio State. All right. Then you have, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell. And a lot of people, they're like, A.D. Mitchell is not that good. No, he was Georgia's number one receiver last year. A lot of people are going back to his true freshman season where he didn't play a whole lot because they had a pretty deep room his true freshman season. But at the end of the day, he kind of catches crucial passes in the playoff. You shouldn't just shrug your shoulders and roll your eyes. And by the way, he had the game-winning touchdown against Ohio State that sent Georgia to the national championship. He was Georgia's wide receiver one. He just was not available for the first 12 games of the year. That's just a fact. A.D. Mitchell is a stud, and Texas got a stud with him. I like Whittington as well. I like Isaiah Nair. Hopefully he can stay healthy and get back to 100% and is back to 100% because I was really excited for Isaiah Nair last year. So be that as it may. Number 10, top 10. I have Oregon. Now I'm ranking them number 10. I wasn't as high on them. I didn't change my prediction right now. But right now, if I had to in this, which again, I don't react emotionally, which is why this didn't factor into my prediction. But what I'm thinking of Oregon right now, they could possibly be the favorite to win the Pac-12. Now, the problem with that is they did draw USC in the Pac-12 schedule. They're going to have to potentially beat USC twice or beat Washington twice. They have to play a couple of really tough teams in this conference. And they play the top 3 teams in this conference, and that's where it becomes concerning. They also have an out-of-conference road game at Texas Tech. One of two things is going to happen there. Either Oregon dodges an upset bullet or Texas Tech makes a statement. But if Oregon can dodge that bullet, I like Oregon's potential to make the college football playoff because of their depth on defense. My big concern about them, and this should be everybody's concern, how is their offense going to flow with Kenny Dillingham moving on to Arizona State? Number 9, Florida State. I want to back off the hype a little bit. I like Florida State. They closed out the season really well, but against pretty decent competition. Let's just put it that way. Some decent competition. I like this Florida State team nonetheless, though. They killed it in the portal, which is why you got to say, okay, though I don't think they were that great of a team. I mean, this was a team that their last 2 games had 1-score games against Florida and Oklahoma, 2 average teams last year, 6-7, 6-7, right? They're a more talented and better roster than they were last year. Keon Coleman, to me, could potentially win the Biletnikoff from what I've heard. He has established himself as a dominant player at Florida State. By the way, you turn on Michigan State tape, there are some games where he overtook Jaden Reed, who I thought was a really good player. But guess what? Jaden Reed with that true Z prototype is not as versatile and not as well-rounded as Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman is a really good player to watch out for as a potential Biletnikoff winner. And I am not overreacting when I say that. Number 8, Penn State. I like what they have at wide receiver more than a lot of people do. Keandre Lambert-Smith, to me, is going to take a big jump, but they also have a couple of other guys who have really been able to flash as young players, but they really need to take that second step, and that's something I hadn't seen yet, which is why they're down at 8 below some of these teams that I feel like have more proven commodities as far as offensively. I trust in what they can do in the run game as far as running backs go. I don't love their offensive line run blocking. And the fact is, Olu Fashanu is an elite pass protector, but he does not get a lot of power going downhill. He needs to get better at that. And a lot of people, because he's such an elite pass protector, want to talk about him as the number 1 tackle in the NFL draft. And I think he's a great prospect for the NFL draft. Probably the number 1. Joe Alt, the other one to talk about there. And then J.C. Latham at Alabama. But at the end of the day, he's got some room to grow still. And a lot of people are just writing it down that, they're going to have a great offensive line because Olu Fashanu is, a great offensive lineman, but at the end of the day, an elite pass protector. So, room to grow for that Penn State offense. That defense is loaded. They probably have the best linebacker in America in Abdul Carter, and they probably have one of the best duos in America at corner. They're going to be dangerous, and then Chop Robinson could break out as maybe the best edge rusher in America. There's a lot of really good edge rushers, so I'm not trying to say he is. I'm just saying he could be one of those that are in that discussion. Number 7, I have Clemson. Now, I do kind of have concerns a little bit about Clemson's depth, specifically at wide receiver. There's some concerns there. It sounds like there's some concerns that haven't been addressed, but I really love Antonio Williams. I think Cole Turner is a pretty solid player as well, and those are 2 players that are different than what they've had. And all they need is for a guy like Bo Collins to really step up and become a true X, because they've had like 5 X's that can't really move all that well and don't have elite ball skills for the last 2 years. they need to really just have some diversity in that room, and I think that's what they have, plus Will Shipley's ability to threaten out of the backfield. Number 6, I have LSU. Can't deny their talent, and we'll talk about LSU a little bit more in the predictions. You can't deny LSU's talent. They are really, really talented, really, really good. I do have, again, concerns about depth, concerns about offensive line. I'm not sure if they're really going to be able to run the ball on an elite level. I think Brian Kelly is building the right things at the offensive line, but at the end of the day, all of LSU's championship teams, at least in the modern era or championship contending teams, like the 2011 team you can rope in there, but the 07 and the 19 teams, like they didn't have elite offensive line or an elite offensive line. I think that they could potentially contend for a national championship, but I don't want to full sell on a team that I feel like has a lot of unprovens. I love their wide receiver room, probably the 3rd or 4th best wide receiver room in America. There you have it. Number 5, USC. Again, they have a lot proven, starting with the best player in America, Caleb Williams. Do I need to say any more? They have Barry Alexander. They got him in the portal, but guess what? They had the leader in sacks and Tuiapoto or whatever it was. He was a really good player, though, and replacing him is not going to be easy, and replacing him with an interior is just as, if not more, impactful. However, that doesn't fix your secondary. That doesn't fix your issues. I have a lot of concerns still about USC's defense until proven otherwise, but that offense is so electric. And if that defense is just marginally better, they're probably in the playoff. Now, they have a lot tougher of a schedule than they did last year. They have to play 9 Power 5 teams in consecutive weeks. That's really tough to go through that with just one loss, especially with some of them, Notre Dame road trip just scattered in there. I did my USC prediction. They had to go to Autzen as well. They have to play against, I think, Washington and Utah. And yeah, it's not easy. Number 4, we get into our top 4 to start the year. And I think it's only fair to put Ohio State 4, and here's why. I want to talk about Alabama and Ohio State together. So number 3, Alabama, number 4, Ohio State. Okay, Ohio State's receiving core is elite. I'm hearing that Carnell Tate is really putting himself in the conversation for one of, if not the starter at the Z position. And I say one of because if Brian Hartline decides to rotate this year, he's going to be that next player coming in at either Z or X. So if he starts, he'll be at the Z position opposite of Marv with Emeka Egbuka in the slot, right? Okay. This defense is really talented, really good. It's kind of got to come to fruition. I am pretty positive Alabama has the best defense in America to start the season off. And so no matter what Ohio State does to improve on that, I think Alabama's offensive line is a little bit more comfortable than Ohio State's. Just a little bit. It's nothing crazy. Like Caden Proctor is probably going to start at tackle. He's a true freshman. Ohio State announced their starters, Josh Fryer and Josh Simmons, but Luke Montgomery is probably that 3rd tackle in that game, and Luke Montgomery might just take Josh Fryer's spot at some point. Okay. So offensively, you get concerned about Alabama's wide receiver room a little bit. I like Isaiah Bond a lot. He's a really, really good player and a guy to watch for. A lot of Alabama fans going crazy about Malik Benson. I want to see it at this level. Okay. Do you blame me? I'm definitely not taking Alabama's offense over Ohio State's, if that's not clear. And I think Devin Brown is an absolute certified dog, right? But Alabama's offense is going to be complementary enough and good at running the ball. They're going to be good enough as a passing threat, even with Jalen Milroe as a projected starter. And I'm pretty sure I know who the starter is for every team, at least on this list. And Alabama is going to probably start Jalen Milroe. And Jalen Milroe's dual threat ability is the biggest reason why. And he doesn't necessarily need to be an elite passer. He's just got to be better than he was in the games that he filled in for Bryce Young. The Arkansas game, second half, and the Texas A&M game. He just needs to play better than he did throwing the ball. But I remember like a 70-some yard touchdown that he ran against the Arkansas Razorbacks. So I'm not going to sell on Jalen Milroe. But I do think Ohio State has a better quarterback. Just Alabama's defense is going to be that dominant. A little bit concerning what's going on. Shaky corner position. But guess what? With the additions that they made in the portal, I don't care. Like, I think they really helped themselves in the only spot that they were concerned to where Terry and Arnold doesn't have to start if he's not ready. And if he takes a jump, then that's more competition for, Key right there in that secondary. So I think that right now it's safe to say Alabama should probably be ranked ahead of Ohio State, but they barely get the nod. These two teams are so similar in the perspective. Number 2, I have Michigan. They return everybody. Pretty obvious. The one thing I will tell you guys about Michigan, I am pretty sure Donovan Edwards is going to be running back 1. Whether he starts or not, I think he's going to have more explosive plays, and I'm going to make a prediction that he's going to have more yards, all purpose for sure, but even rush yards, I think he's going to have a slightly more than Blake Corum. I think you could be dealing with 2 1,000-yard backs. I get that Michigan's talking about prioritizing the pass game. Who's their play caller? Oh, yeah. Offensive line coach Sherrod Moore, right? I don't know why I was tripping up on that, but Sherrod Moore is their offensive coordinator. He's their play caller, and he's not splitting those duties with Matt Weiss, right? He's an offensive line coach. They like to run the ball. I'm not saying they're not going to try to unleash J.J. McCarthy. I'm saying they're not going to be able to help but unleash Donovan Edwards. And number 1, Georgia. Obvious reasons, right? They return a lot off of a national championship team last year, and a lot of people are sleeping on them. Carson Beck might just be a significant upgrade from Stetson Bennett. I shouldn't say significant. That's disrespectful, but he could be an upgrade at quarterback than Stetson Bennett from what I've heard.